Hi, this is a tutorial about the light path node in Blender. So imagine you've got a spiffy scene with certified Blender Guru donuts and a nice glass of water. Your camera is shooting off light rays into your scene, gathering information. The light rays are categorized in a few different ways. It starts out as a camera ray, and if it never hits anything, it stays that way. If it bounces off of a solid object, it's a reflection ray. And if it goes through a glass or translucent object, it becomes a transmission ray. Oh, and then if the ray hits a light, it becomes a shadow ray. Also, think of those reflection and transmission rays as folders that can contain more data. That data is diffuse, glossy, and singular. So the first 7 outputs of the LightPath node, they have to do with filtering between different kinds of rays. They return 1 or 0, true or false. Ray length, on the other hand, returns the distance traveled by the light ray, regardless of what kind of light ray it is. And ray depth, it returns the number of times the ray bounces around in your scene. So with that said, how do we actually use the light path node? In this example, let's focus on the camera ray output. So I've got my world setting selected. This is the HDR that's lighting my scene. The spheres look cool, but the HDR itself is kind of distracting. Now let's bring in the background that I actually want to be there, but I don't want to light the spheres. This is what that looks like, and if it were lighting the spheres, you can see that the spheres are pretty dull, pretty flat. So how do I mix these? I bring in a mix node. Oops, not that one. Mix shader. I plug both of these in, and then I use the camera ray as a factor. Now if we plug this directly into the world output, we'll see that everything shaded white here is a camera ray and everything not is not a camera ray. In this specific example, these would be reflection rays. So we can use this as a filter that tells Blender, hey, we still want to use the lighting from this node, but we want the actual render to come out with this background, with this as the result. All right, let's move on to the shadow ray example. So if I use the light path node and use the is shadow ray output, I can actually change the color of our shadows to be whatever I want. I could even remove the shadows completely by having our transparent node be set to white. All right, let's move on to the next few rays all at the same time. So we've got this diffuse ray, we've got the glossy, singular reflection, and transmission. And if you only have the light path node as a reference, you would probably think, okay, there's probably like 5 different kinds of objects, right? That's at least what I thought, but actually, a better way of looking at it would be kind of like this. We've got our reflection and transmission that contains these 3. So just to kind of hammer this home, let's look at what this would look like rendered. So right now I've got the background plane selected, and you can see when I change the color, it changes the background. And you can see that all of our objects here are reacting to how brightly colored our plane is. And I've got a simple color mix node here. And what happens if I use the diffuse ray as a factor? Just take a second and ask yourself which one of these objects will be affected, right? So it'll be our diffuse objects. And what happens if we plug in the glossy ray? You would think it would be this object and this object, right? But actually it also includes our singular rays. And I haven't really explained what singular rays are. Basically what they are is any object with perfect reflection on it. So if I select this diamond here, you'll see it's just a glossy node with 0 roughness. And if I select this guy, It's just a glass with zero roughness. So if there was ever a time where you needed to filter out only the glossy objects, what do you think you would do? Well, we have this singular ray, which does only include these two. We could use a math node, right? So let's bring up our math node, and we can subtract our singular ray from the glossy ray. All right, so what do you think would happen if we plugged in our reflection ray here? Hopefully it'll just filter out these three objects, right? So yep, and this is just a diffuse diamond exactly the same as this. I've just got it over here to show you how it interacts with a glass plane here. So that's working exactly like we want. And what happens if we plug in the transmission ray? All right, it's looking pretty good. So hopefully that helps you understand the difference between these rays here. And with this visual reference, it becomes a lot easier to figure out how you can combine the different rays with math nodes. So how can we use the ray length output? One way is we can change the color and strength of our light depending on how far the light is traveling in the scene. So I've got our light selected and it's got an emission node right here. What happens when we just plug in a color ramp which is connected to a ray length output? It doesn't give us exactly what we want yet. That's because the largest value on the color ramp node is 1, but the distance light travels out of this lamp is a lot larger than 1, right? So in order to fix this, we can use a map range node. And there we have it. Our light is now changing color depending on how far the light travels. All right, how about the depth output? How can we use it to influence our scene? In this example, I have the sunlight object selected. So when I go to render view and I influence this, you see it changes the color. What happens when I plug in the ray depth with these nodes into the strength? All of a sudden, part of the scene is dark. So what's going on? Remember that the ray depth outputs the number of times your light rays bounce around in the scene. So with this math node, we're saying filter out all of the light rays that have bounced over 1 time. So out of all of those light rays, we're giving them an emission of, let's say 0.5. And then all of the light rays that have bounced less than once, let's give them a strength of 3. All of a sudden, we've drastically increased the contrast of our render using the ray depth output. So let's try to influence the color using the same principle. So let's copy these. I'm going to change this to a color, and let's make the shadow a little bit more blue. Let's see what happens when I plug it in. And there you go. And remember, we're just selecting the sun here. We're not even touching any of the materials. I'll be skipping over the last 4 outputs because they're the same thing as the ray depth output. They just further filter in between the different kinds of light rays. But I will be talking about them in the blog version of this video if you want to check the link in the description. I think that'll wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you think, or if you have questions, I'll be checking the comments. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.